We are Angel, Andres, and Stan, and we're going to present about the academic research on multi-class structures and corporate governance. So for this question, we review 3 different papers. The first one is by SAP, and in 2008, he asked what is the relationship between governance and executive compensation. And to answer this question, he looks at the compensation of the top 5 executives of over 400 public firms in Canada, and he used the multi-class share as a dummy variable. He also takes into account if the size of firms and other important covariates that could bias his results. At the end, he finds that having a representative of controlling shareholders and giving equity to board members translates into a lower executive compensations. So this is going to be important for analyzing the Snap's Inc. Decision of issuing non-voting stocks, since it will mean that they are giving more weight to controlling members. So here are the main results from the paper, and we can see that controlling shareholder and multi-class shares have a significant value, and both have a negative effect. The second paper is by Honoré et al. And they ask if governance practices looking to align shareholder and managers' interests affect R&D investments. And they use a sample of 177 European companies which are intensively engaged in R&D activities. And they as a variable, they use the anti-takeover measures and voting rights restrictions. So the idea is that the higher the indicator, the lower is the higher the indicator, the better governance the firm has. And they find that R&D intensity is negatively correlated with this indicator. So that means that the more restrictions on shareholders, the better the R&D intensity. So this is going to be very important for long-term investments. And again, here are the main findings by the researchers. So the first variable here is the limitation of anti-takeover devices. This includes restrictions on voting rights. And while it is not so important for the top R&D spender, it is for R&D intensity. Finally, we analyzed a paper, an article by Lund, and here Lund explains that there are 3 main channels that make voting restrictions good for the firm. The first one is regarding agency cost, because it makes it gives more voice to motivate the shareholders. The second one is about transaction cost, because maybe less motivated shareholders don't want to vote and then fight it quite costly. So they have an incentive to don't have a voice and go through cheaper stocks that don't offer a voice. And finally, he talks about suboptimal voting outcomes. So if pressure to vote, unmotivated shareholders are likely to vote randomly instead of looking for doing their homework and looking for information about the firm and what their decision means for the company.
Yes, I will tell you something more about the literature, considering the fact that Snap Inc. issued non-voting stocks. First of all, Honore et al. In 2015 argued that investors' horizon of investors substantially differs from that of the management. Shareholders tend to have like a short-term investment horizon, and therefore they diminish the R&D projects and harm the long-term project of the company. Furthermore, research from SAP conducted in 2008 shows that having controlling shareholders reduces the executive compensation of managers, which translates into higher corporate governance standards. And finally, Lund in 2019 proposed that by issuing non-voting stocks, firms are able to discriminate between informed and uninformed shareholders. By issuing non-voting stocks, firms are free from the cost of voting and proposals by uninformed shareholders, which increases the efficiency of the company's corporate governance. In conclusion, all the mentioned papers are in favor of the decision made by Snap Inc. And now we go to the next slide.
Considering what we said before, it is very clear that companies such as Snap Inc. they aim to isolate themselves from the unwise decisions of external investors and the interest of short-term oriented stockholders. Therefore, it would be insightful to find a balanced scheme that allows shareholder participation while also protecting the company. So it's not ideal to force companies to allow voting rights to their stockholders by banning them from indexes, and neither it is optimal to allow every investor to have voting rights, since the company would not be protected. So there's a couple of suggestions that we will talk about. The first one is to encourage long-term investment above short-term investment. This could be achieved by granting incentives to the shareholders who keep their stocks for a certain period decided by the founding members. This period can be around 5 years. And well, the incentives that are proposed would be additional privileges such as, well, voting power, obviously, additional share options, or higher dividend payments. This may influence the investment horizon of stockholders and could also bring closer the objectives of both the investors and the founding members. Another more straightforward proposal is to allow a veto power to the founding members in a scenario in which stockholders can actually vote. In this way, stockholders would be able to have participation in the company's decision to a certain degree, but ultimately will be the vote members who allow those proposals to actually come true. In this way, participation is allowed, and also the founding members can protect their own business from unwise decisions that they consider not to be in line with the long-term expectations of their company. These suggestions have some restrictions that we will mention. The first one is time constraints, because, well, to capture the effects of this proposal, it would be necessary to evaluate data on a time frame of years after the introduction of the measures. So it's not easy to do it in a short period of time. Also, there's a scarcity of shared studies. This proposal is as novel as it is complicated to implement. Therefore, it would be far from easy to find companies willing to experiment with their own stocks by managing them in line with what the research requests. Finally, data availability. Well, since there have not been any experimental studies so far with a defined treatment applied and compared to a control group, then the research would depend solely on observational data. This makes it difficult to plausibly establish causality. Finally, I'd like to mention 2 papers concerning these situations. First one is called "Do Managerial Incentive Horizons Have Capital Market Consequences?" In this paper, the research team, they found that CEOs that have short-term horizon as their expectation, they tend to artificially inflate the stock price, which is good for some investors during a certain period of time. However, in the long term, the lack of investment in research and development can harm the stock price. Well, this is relevant because it exposes one of the problems that makes founding members want to isolate their company from the decisions of short-term investors. The second one, it's called "What's in a Vote? The Short and Long-Run Impact of Dual Class Equity on IPO Firm Values." In this paper, the researchers found that the market punishes IPOs that do not have voting rights and also rewards the ones that have voting rights. How do they do it? With the price. So on average, IPOs that have no voting rights, they will have lower stock prices, and the stocks that offer voting rights, they will have on average higher prices, and this difference is called the voting premium. So it could also be interesting for the company that issues the IPO to include the voting rights, because it will positively affect their stock price. Thank you very much.